Thank you very much. I appreciate being here today. I gave a talk on Tuesday to a group of people that they sat there with their arms like this going, no, no, no. So it's really nice to be able to stand up here and say, I think most of you are believers that climate change is happening. People will say, well, why bother giving a talk to people who already believe in climate change? Well, you guys need to know some of the facts. So that's an important point, I think. So I am going to talk about how climate change is changing, well, pretty much everything. My specialty is looking at plants and animals, not marine things, but terrestrial plants and animals. But anyway, let's get started here. Whoops. Okay, so what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about climate change, what we have seen in the past, what's going on now, and what's going to happen in the future probably. Then talk about the other living beings that there are out there. And then I want to end up by saying that there is hope, but we have to do something about it. We can't just sit back and do what we do naturally. So first of all, we all know that when ice gets warmed, it melts. And that's exactly what is happening all around the world. There are stunning pictures, and I wanted to use this opportunity. If you have not seen the movie Chasing Ice, it sounds really boring. You go and you sit and watch ice melt. But it is done by a photographer that is, he's absolutely fabulous. So if you haven't seen the movie, you can stream it on Netflix. And now the director has another film out called Chasing Coral, and it is absolutely fabulous. So I recommend both of those movies to you about climate change. It will give you some facts that are very, very important. And it also, at least Chasing Ice, is absolutely spectacularly beautiful. We've all seen this type of a plot. On the x-axis is years, on the y-axis is change in temperature. This is in degrees Fahrenheit, and it's changing from the average from 1951 to 1980. And yes, indeed, even, well, maybe not our president, but anyway, most people will say that the climate is getting warmer. And this is a plot of basically the same thing. And what it is doing now is showing you around the edges are months, and it's just showing you how the temperature has changed. Since 1850 to 1900 was the zero mark. This is the changing. And I swear, Trump, if he saw that, would realize that actually it is getting warmer. The dot at the very end is March 2017. So it's really quite striking. I'm going to wait for you to see it again. It's just really, how can anybody believe that we're not having climate change? It's getting warmer and warmer. Pretty amazing. So people will say to me, but Terry, humans don't have anything to do about climate change. Because the oceans are so big, the atmosphere is so big, how can we be affecting it? Well, this picture is showing you the planet Earth and taking all of the surface water on the planet and putting it into a ball. And this isn't underground water, it's surface water, but it's all the ocean waters. We think the oceans are huge. They are huge. But if you put it all into a volume, you'll see that that's just how big it is relative to the overall size of the planet. It's really very small. Now, if we do the same thing to the atmosphere is a little tougher because it's gas. But here you have a small ball of atmosphere. Again, it doesn't take much to change the chemistry of either the oceans or the atmosphere, and that is exactly what we have been doing. We've been changing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere dramatically, and this is an old slide. We now know this goes back to 600,000 years ago. It was below about 300 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we are now at, do you guys know, how high are we? How high is the CO2 now? It's about 410. It's a little bit over 410. So we really are spiking, and the thing that is very, very dramatic here is the spike itself. It really is a very striking spike, and that is caused by us. Another way to explain to people who say people aren't actually causing this is to every single living being takes in carbon, and we all have a certain carbon signature. Dinosaurs have a very, very, very specific carbon signature. That carbon signature is in the oil that we're drilling out, and it's in our atmosphere that is up there. It is the same signature. How can we get that same signature from the dinosaurs, the oil, up into the atmosphere without us? We're the ones who have done it. That's the easiest way to explain to someone who is a contrarian that yes, indeed, humans are really impacting what is going on in the atmosphere of our planet. So now we can talk about what may be happening in the future, and this is really pretty scary. This comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and what it is showing on the x-axis is year, on the y-axis is parts per million of CO2 equivalent. It's equivalent because it's also taking into account other things that aren't CO2, like methane and other greenhouse gases. So these are different storylines that we have, and it depends upon how our story is going to go forward. If we are going to have business as usual, this is the line that we're on right now. We actually got off of it for a little while. The last 2 or 3 years, we jumped down to a lower line. We've now jumped back up again. So this is the business as usual. This is where if we start having a lot more cooperation among different countries and the like, sharing technology, that type of thing. This is a magic line that if we actually stop producing CO2 using fossil fuel just right now, that would be what would happen. The thing that is going on with CO2 equivalents is once you get all of that mess in the atmosphere, it has a hard time getting out. The CO2 that all of us put into the atmosphere coming to this, except if we rode our bikes, coming to this meeting today is going to be up there for at least 50 more years and probably 100, and 25% of that CO2 that we emitted today will be up there in 1,000 years. So we need to somehow figure out how to get the CO2 out of the atmosphere. That's a tough thing to do. And then we have what is projected in the surface temperature itself, and we have it going up and up. That way, the other thing that we're concerned about is as we have the warming of the planet, the clathrates, the methane in the oceans are going to start melting. As soon as the clathrates start melting, it's going to go into the atmosphere, and that could spike the temperature by 4 to 6 degrees in 20 years, which would be devastating. This now is just what we have in the future that is happening. This is coming from a model itself, and you can see as it's getting later and later, it's getting warmer and warmer, as we saw before, but now we're going to go out into the future, and you can see the model. If we stay on business as usual, we're going to have a problem. It's going to get pretty warm. And then we have to worry about sea level rise. By the end of the century, we should be up by about 9 to 10 feet. This is not taking into account Greenland. And so when we're not taking into account Greenland, Greenland is, well, if we don't take into account Greenland, we're going to have be up by 10 feet by 2100. If we do take into account Greenland, Greenland has enough ice on it to raise sea level rise by 27 to 29 feet. We don't know how soon that will happen. We don't understand how the ice is melting on Greenland yet, So we do have that concern too. About 37% of the human population gets their protein from the oceans. Now what's going to happen to all, and they live right along the oceans, what is going to happen to those environmental refugees? Other living beings, this has nothing to do with climate change. This is a group of three species, the wolf, the coyote, and the red fox. In the late 1800s, we decided we wanted to get rid of the wolves. We smushed down the wolves, up popped the coyotes. That was a complete surprise. Then in the late 20s, we decided to get rid of the coyotes. We pushed down the coyotes, and up popped the red foxes. So here we had three species, just three species, and we had two events. And we had two incredible surprises. Now we have about 2 million species that we've identified on the planet, and we are going to have a lot of different types of changing going on. The thing that I can guarantee you that we are going to have lots and lots and lots of surprises. And an example of the interactions of species, we used to have polar bears that would go out and hunt for seals because the ice was there. They would take the seals and literally fling blood and guts all over the place. And then we had this little guy, the ivory gull, that would feed on that flung around blood and guts. And now that we don't have the ice that the polar bears can go out and get the seals, the ivory gull is plummeting in abundance, and it may be extinct actually within my lifetime. Now, there are different changes that go on with species. One of the changes is phenological shifts. Phenology is just a change in timing, and a lot of changes have gone on in the springtime. We all know that. This is a plot that I did a long time ago, but I wanted to show that this was happening way far back, and it began in the late 60s. This is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. A woman would go out and record the very first time that she would see, for this example, is a sandhill crane. And over the years, the sandhill cranes were in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan are coming earlier and earlier and earlier. The other change that occurs is a change in range shifts. And the ranges are shifting north and north in the northern hemisphere, south in the southern hemisphere, and up in elevation. In the oceans, they're going deeper because it's cooler, and they're also going toward the pole, just like the terrestrials are doing. And that's fine. We've had that happen over millennia. Species have moved around, but they haven't had these incredible barriers like that we put up now. I really wouldn't want to be a turtle trying to cross across the New Jersey Turnpike, trying to get up to there. So we are going to have to, as humans, we are going to have to be helping these species. That's a lot of species to be helping. And how are we going to pick the ones that we're going to help? How are we going to put the money, figure out what money goes to which species? It's tough. It's a real tough nut to crack here. So what's going to happen is we're going to have a lot of extinctions. This is the golden toad. It is the first species to be conclusively shown to go extinct because of climate change. This was in Costa Rica by a colleague of mine, Alan Pounds. He was studying golden toads, and one year he didn't find any. The second year he didn't find any. Then he went back and looked at his data and found that yes, indeed, it had to do with the lifting of the cloud bank in Costa Rica. There is background extinction. All species go extinct. That's the way life is. But the background extinction is less than one species in 1,000 species over 1,000 years. That's how we measure extinction. So it's less than one species in 1,000 species over 1,000 years. The extinction rate today is about one species in 10 species, not 1,000 species, over 100 years, not 1,000 years. extinction is going rapidly. I used to say, and I used to have a different slide than the one that we're seeing here. I used to say we're standing right at the brink of a mass extinction event. We're no longer at the brink. We're in the middle. We're not in the middle. We're at the very beginning, but we're at a beginning. We are starting a mass extinction event, and the extinctions are going up like this. And Florida is probably going to have the distinction of having the first bird species to go extinct during this sixth extinction event, and it is in the Florida grasshopper sparrow. We have one person who is actually trying very, very hard to maintain the Florida grasshopper sparrow, but it doesn't look good. And it's not just due to climate change, but climate change is affecting it greatly. The IPCC assessment, report 4, said that when, it's not going to be an if, but when we go up by 2 degrees above natural, that's 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above natural, and we've already gone up about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. We could lose about 400,000 species. I can guarantee you that in that 400,000 species, that there are going to be species that we really absolutely have to stay alive. Now, when, and I hope it's a when, I hope it's an if, not a when, but when we get to 4 degrees Celsius, which is 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit above natural, we could lose half the species on the planet. Think about that for a minute. Half the species on the planet. What right do we, as one species, have? What moral right do we have of causing that many extinctions? That's a really tough one. So we really need to stay below 2 degrees. And that 2 degrees is a magic number because we've heard about it from the Paris Accord. Please stay below 2 degrees. Please stay below 2 degrees. The reason we want to stay below 2 degrees is because of the cloth rates, the frozen methane in the oceans. We want to make sure that that stays solid. We don't want it to melt. The trouble is that as we warm, the waters are warming. As the waters warm, the pressure is not as great. So you have 2 things going on. The pressure is being alleviated and the water is warming. That's causing the cloth rates to start melting. There are now these big, huge boats, I can't think of what they're called. When you go on a cruise, there you go. When you go on a cruise, they're all of a sudden finding there are places in the middle of the ocean that are just roiling with all this. Why is it roiling? Why is all these bubbles coming up? Well, the bubbles that are coming up are methane. And as we have this methane going up into the atmosphere, methane is 28 times greater CO2 trapper than CO2. It's 28 times better at trapping warmth than CO2. So if we all of a sudden start having these cloth rates start melting, which we know starts happening at 2 degrees C, then we could actually spike temperature by 4 to 6 degrees in 20 years. That's a real shocking thing to think about. So what we can do or what we must do, we have to have a paradigm shift. Blow in your face and she'll follow you anywhere. We've had a paradigm shift in smoking. We've done it before. We can do it again. This, to me, is one of the most hopeful slides that I have. This is location down here, and this is the tons of CO2 emission equivalent per capita, and it's only for 2014. That's the latest data I have. For the world, it's low because of there's so many people in developing countries that don't emit CO2. But now, let's look at California, how low it is. Florida is just a little bit higher, but it's still fairly low. But let's go over here. What's going on with Texas? What in the hell is happening here with Wyoming? Well, Wyoming, how do they get their electricity? From coal. From coal. So this is saying that California and Florida know something or are willing to do things that Texas and Wyoming are not willing to do. And we need to be going out and saying we have got to have this change happening. We can't have Wyoming doing this. If you drive a Prius in Wyoming, you're not doing any good. So what you need to do is have solar panels, and Bill is going to be talking to us. Bill put the solar panels on my house. If you can afford solar panels, put on solar panels. The other thing you need to be doing is we need to have renewable energies in wind energy. And in wind energy is very important. I am on the National Audubon Society board, and we say, oh, you can't have windmills because it kills birds. Well, if you don't talk about raptors, eagles, and hawks, one wind turbine will kill up to 5.2 to 5.7 birds per turbine per year. So if you have a cat, here's how many birds are killed by cats that you let outside. Are you really worried about the birds and turbines? They're way over here. They barely even show. So if you have a cat and you have to let it outside, don't let it outside at night. That'll help. If you have a cat, try to keep it inside. They'll survive a lot better inside. Anyway, a lot of us were around when we saw this picture for the first time. I want you all to remember the Earth is a small place. We can cause it a lot of damage, and what we need to be doing is taking care of it, and that's what we're here for today. And now, thanks so much for listening.